In today's episode, we're going to consider just how much we take the wonder drug sugar for granted. We're going to play Trivial Pursuit, the Man in Black edition, and we're going to find our friend Eddie Dean in various stages of undress. Welcome to Dark Tower YouTube. My name is Michelle McEwen. I am your host, and I'm really glad to be back with you here. We're going to be talking again about the drawing of the second book in the Dark Tower series. Here on Dark Tower YouTube, we do a deep psychological dive into the magic, the mystery, and the metaphysics of this wonderful magnum opus of Stephen King's The Dark Tower. We're going to cover chapters 4 and 5 of The Prisoner today. So let's jump right on into it. Starting with chapter 4, entitled The Tower. Did y'all think you were going to see the tower when you read this? Tell me in the comments. I did the first time I read this book. I got very excited. And wasn't it just so mean of Stephen King to kind of bait and switch us there? You'll remember that the last time we talked, we were hauling Eddie off of the airplane by the customs officials with Roland's Ka, his life force, riding shotgun in Eddie's consciousness. So cool. And I want to stop for a minute and talk about the name Eddie, because Eddie Dean seems to be our new friend. I think he's going to be around for some time. So let's look at his name, because as Roland said last week, names are secret things full of power. Oh yes. Edward is derived from the Old English elements Ead, meaning wealth or prosperity, and Weird, meaning guardian or protector, and that's W-E-A-R-D, not E-I-R-D, although Eddie is a little weird. Therefore, Edward generally meaning wealthy guardian or prosperous protector. The name Dean's roots trace back also to Old English, and it's this word dinu, which meant valley. There were some other meanings, though. It is derived from the Greek deikanos, which meant a monk or dignitary who was in charge of 10 other priestly people. So that word dean could be, or was originally used as a religious title, somebody in charge of religious folk. But we know that today we see that word used, the dean of the department at a college or university. So still this position of authority. So we pull this all together and we say the name Eddie Dean could be associated with a prosperous protector, one associated with strength, leadership, and a connection to nature. That's that valley meaning. So I like this. We do see that Eddie this week steps into those gunslinger shoes so that he's taking charge, he's leading the action several times, and as a protector, he saves Roland's life. He saves Roland's life 3 times to be exact. I went back because I'm looking for the 3s all the time, and you'll see them popping up in the machine, not the machine gun. The guy fires the trigger 3 times. So these things continue to occur. But it looks like Eddie saves Roland's life 3 times in this chapter and then starting the next one. So we'll get there next week, but just know that we see Eddie saving Roland, which is a big deal. So that idea of protector is huge here. He's not a nature boy, so the idea of Dean meaning valley and one with the nature of the valley, we haven't seen that from this city boy, but there's a lot of book left, isn't there? So we'll just have to watch out for that one. There's a ton of character development this week, so we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about what we're learning about our new character and our old friend Roland. King starts to really show us how dependent on Henry Eddie was. So we're starting to see a lot of things like that. How addicted to heroin he was, and what a gunslinger he is becoming. This chapter opens with Eddie in a small white room in his underwear. And I want to stop because remember last week we read that amazing, beautiful run-on sentence that was Eddie imagining what was going to happen to him should he be caught with the drugs. I'm not going to read the whole thing again, sorry. But I'm going to pull out a piece just to refresh our memories. King writes, they take you into the little room and ask you if you'd mind taking off your shirt, and you say, yeah, I sure would. I'd mind like hell. I picked up a little cold down in the Bahamas, and the air conditioning in here is real high, and I'm afraid it might turn into pneumonia. And they say, oh, is that so? Do you always sweat like that when the air conditioning is too high, Mr. Dean? So notice how this plays out very similarly to what he was imagining. He does not say to them that he picked up a cold. He says, I picked up a little allergy in the Bahamas. But those exact words, just changing cold out for allergies, he is in this small room. I mean, I guess that's not too much of a stretch because that's where they take you when the drug stuff goes down. But the way that they're responding to him, oh, is that so? Nobody says that word for word, but we do get that vibe from them. They say, that's a very interesting red mark on your chest. And Eddie is, just like in his imaginal scene, being a real smartass with them, which is fantastic and very funny. But I pull that out as a piece of magic to examine, really. There's a whole philosophy, a magical philosophy out there that postulates that imagination, thought, consciousness creates reality. Your reality appears as you think. As you think, so you are. These are the ideas that I'm talking about. And there was a man by the name of Neville Goddard who there's many spiritual teachers in that realm of belief, but Neville Goddard was a big one, and I think he would look at that imaginal act from Eddie Dean, who was vividly imagining what was going to come, and then how it actually played out, which was pretty darn close, and he would say, yes, I told you so. My theory is correct. So we're just always pulling out little things like that here on Dark Tower YouTube. I love it so much. But let's get back to the action in that little room. Unlike in his imaginal scene, where he is in deep shit, this time he's not, because he doesn't have the drugs on him, thanks to Roland. And he feels very confident, and he's correct in his assessment that they knew everything but could prove nothing. That's big. He's safe. It's a weird situation to be in here. Roland is inside of Eddie's consciousness, remember, and he has to leave him once during this interrogation stretch. Eddie has discovered that he can see the door behind him. When he turns around, he can see the door, the magic door that opens on to Roland's beach, and he's been just checking that out with fascination throughout this period. But this is right before Roland's going to leave him. King writes, all right, Roland asked. TCB, man. I don't understand. Go take care of business. Oh, all right. I'll not be long. And suddenly, that other had been gone. Simply gone. Like a wisp of smoke, so thin that the slightest vagary of wind could blow it away. Eddie looked around again, saw nothing but drilled white panels. No door, no ocean, no weird monstrosities. And he felt his gut begin to tighten. There was no question of believing it had all been a hallucination after all. The dope was gone, and that was all the proof that he needed. But Roland had helped somehow, made it easier. So we have heard that Eddie is tight with his brother, and we're getting the sense from that last paragraph or this whole thing really, that Eddie has not only accepted the presence of another man's consciousness in his mind, which is huge, but he's already leaning pretty hard into Roland's presence there. Roland leaves Eddie's consciousness a second time after they've been released from the little room. They're outside of the airport, and Roland has to go back and feed himself and take some medicine. And we get more of this idea of Eddie's codependency shown to us by King. He writes, "The doorway was gone, just as Roland was gone from his mind. Eat hearty, my friend, Eddie thought. But was this weird alien presence that called itself Roland his friend? That was far from proved, wasn't it? He had saved Eddie's bacon, true enough, but that didn't mean he was a Boy Scout. All the same, he liked Roland, feared him, but liked him as well. Suspected that in time he could love him as he loved Henry. Eat well, stranger, he thought. Eat well, stay alive, and come back." Wow, he could grow to love him like his brother. We're moving quickly here. And a little later, we're going to talk about intimacy and fate. But just from a physical character standpoint, the codependency is strong here, where he's that fast to fall in love with this person who has come into his world in a very close way, where they're moving together and it's like, boop, okay, I love you. So that's interesting. Also, you'll remember though that Jake did the same thing. Jake fell in love with Roland instantly. So it's an echo of that relationship. Remember last week we were kind of setting up, there's a similar lead up to this door in the way that there was to the way station. And Eddie falling in love with Roland immediately, the way that Jake did, I feel like is another echo of that. Maybe it's just that Roland is so easy to fall in love with though. Do you love Roland? I'm in love with Roland. Back to the action though. The custom agents have been questioning Eddie well over an hour and they're getting nowhere because there's nowhere to get. But Eddie's getting angrier and angrier because there is nowhere to get and he's ready to get out of there. And he does an interesting thing here where he doesn't just eventually lose his temper with the customs agents, but he keeps his cool and he checks in with Roland before blowing his top to see if taking a stand is a good idea at this point. Now pay attention to the way that this is written. King writes, "Eddie was suddenly angry, white hot angry. He listened inside. Okay," the voice responded at once. And Eddie felt more than agreement. He felt a kind of go-to-the-wall approval. It made him feel the way he felt when Henry hugged him, tousled his hair, punched him on the shoulder and said, "You done good, kid. Don't let it go to your head, but you done good." So there's just another example of how this connection and relationship are deepening. We knew that they could communicate with each other. So Eddie thinks something and Roland hears it. And then Roland thinks something and Eddie hears it. But this communication, nobody is saying anything. Eddie doesn't ask a question. He's getting angry, and then he listens. And Roland says, okay. There was no question asked there, though. So this form of telepathy is becoming even deeper than it was between these two men who are communicating with each other. He also is turning to Roland for guidance, which is pretty big. And when he gets that validation, it's very meaningful to him. He is, again, just comparing Roland with Henry. Roland and Henry. So we're getting that beat hit by King quite often here. So Eddie does get angry, blows up. He says he'll do a blood test without a court order, as long as everybody else in the room is willing to do that as well. And of course they are not. They ask Eddie to take his underwear off again, and he gets a little nervous because his track marks are hidden underneath of his nutsack, and he thinks, oh no, they figured out finally where I'm shooting up, but he doesn't let it go that far. He says to them, King writes, I'm through taking things off, taking things down, and eating this shit, Eddie said. You get someone in here, and we'll do a bunch of blood tests, or I'm getting out. Now, which do you want? That silence again. And when they started looking at each other, Eddie knew he had won. We won, he amended. What's your name, fella? Roland. Yours is Eddie. Eddie Dean. You listen good. Listen and watch. So great final formal introduction between these two men. And that last bit of Roland's response, I want to pause because it's a little different. You listen good. Roland could have said, yeah, sure, I'm a gunslinger, or absolutely, yes, I do, I'm a good listener, something like that. But he says, listen and watch. Why does he add that? Why does King throw that in there? And I think it's because Roland, as the gunslinger, is so observant of everything. We already know this, but he knows Eddie better than Eddie knows himself, even here, even at this early stage. And he's kind of slyly showing his hand there. Eddie has no idea what Roland means, and we're not even quite sure, but I think that's what it's about. Listen and watch. I know everybody's number, including yours, Eddie Dean. So tell me what you thought about that little bit there. We get some information about how the magic door works. So like I said, Eddie can see this when he looks over his shoulder. And as long as Roland is within Eddie's consciousness, the door travels with Eddie. When Roland leaves, the door disappears. And I'm going to read a part where Roland had left, and then he's coming back into Eddie's consciousness after he moved himself up the beach. So the first time he left was to move his body up away from the lobsters and move the cocaine away from the lobsters as well. King writes, Eddie looked around again. The doorway had returned, but now it offered a slightly different view of the world. And he realized that as it moved with him here, it moved with Roland there. The thought made him shiver a little. It was like being tied to this other by some weird umbilicus. And when Roland is back inside of himself and he crawls up the beach, we're back in his perspective a little later. The way that King writes this section works so perfectly, but really he's jumping around in time. We're getting the information that Roland left and what is happening to Eddie, and then we go back and say this is what happened when Roland left. It feels very seamless to me, though. I wasn't feeling confused at all when I read this. Okay, so this is Roland back inside of himself, crawling up the beach, realizing that what Eddie intuited, that the door is moving with them, is correct. King writes, I take it with me everywhere I go, he thought, just as he does. It comes with us everywhere now, following like a curse you can never get rid of. All of this felt so true as to be unquestionable. And so did one other thing. If the door between them should close, it would be closed forever. When that happens, Roland thought grimly, he must be on this side with me. What a paragon of virtue you are, gunslinger, the man in black laughed. He seemed to have taken up permanent residence inside Roland's head. You have killed the boy. That was the sacrifice that enabled you to catch me, and I suppose, to create the door between worlds. Now you intend to draw your three one by one and condemn all of them to something you would not have for yourself, a lifetime in an alien world where they may die as easily as animals in a zoo set free in a wild place. The tower, Roland thought wildly. Once I've gotten to the tower and done whatever it is I'm supposed to do there, accomplished whatever fundamental act of restoration or redemption for which I was meant, then perhaps they... But the shrieking laughter of the man in black, the man who was dead but lived on as the gunslinger's stained conscience, would not let him go on with the thought. Neither, however, could the thought of the treachery he contemplated turn him aside from his course. Oh boy. Last episode, we noticed that the man in black had started talking to Roland, taking up space in his head, but now we're told he's taken up permanent residency there. So this is a shift. And King is very sure to point out to us that this is actually Roland talking to himself when he says this is Roland's stained conscience. So in a book like this, there could be an idea that the man in black is actually communicating telepathically with Roland because that's what's going on. So why couldn't the man in black also be not dead and talking to Roland? But that's not what's going on here. And King is very sure to point that out. This is Roland talking to Roland. Maybe not being able to sit with these feelings again as he himself looking at himself. So he has to personify that as the man in black. But this theme of sacrifice, we're not liking this. So this internal battle that we saw in book number 1, where Roland is just struggling over the fate of Jake, feels like it's showing up again. So again, this echo of book number 1 and this theme of sacrifice is alive and well in the drawing of the 3. Did you notice in that paragraph that Roland has pretty much convinced himself that killing Jake was a necessary sacrifice? I suppose I needed to kill him to get the door. That's great, Roland. I hope you feel better. I bet most of us would disagree with Roland on that point. So that's not Stephen King revealing to us, the reader, that yes, he needed to kill Jake to get that door. That's not what happened there. That's Roland talking to himself about what happened, and not even definitively, I suppose, the sacrifice of the boy was necessary to get to the man in black, and I suppose, sure, also to get the door. He still has no idea why he's going to the tower or what he's supposed to do when he gets there. So this is also the same from book 1. And you'd think, again, this would give Roland some pause. Maybe he should stop and consider these die-hard feelings around sacrificing yet another wonderful character in the name of the tower when he doesn't even know what the stakes are. It surely makes us wonder again, what is the tower and why is he going there? Who told him that he was meant to go there? We do get this sense of Ka or destiny around Roland and the tower, but we have no idea where that came from. or what it means. And we hope that in time, King will reveal all of this to us. But to have Roland ready here to kill off another character that we already love in the name of something that he doesn't even understand, we're not putting up with that again. We're not doing this the same way again. I mean, that would be silly to write the same exact book twice. But we're finding ourselves in that similar situation and saying, no, Roland, we need to act a little bit differently this time. Let's have a different outcome. We're judging Roland pretty hard here, so we're going to stop like we do in this show and have some empathy. Let's put ourselves in Roland's shoes and see what's going on here. So, what's happening? Have you ever wanted something, someone so badly that it blinded you? But the thing itself is questionable as to its goodness for you. From an outside point of view, you can't see it. And the example of this, I think, a great example, is when you meet someone, a potential romantic partner, and they have red flags written all over them. And people around you see it, and they're saying, girl, that's a terrible idea. Don't do that. All signs are saying steer clear. But you argue with them wildly, as Roland does. You can't hear it, and you have all the reasons why you need to achieve this thing that you've been called to do. And we tell ourselves stories like this using this language of Ka, of fate, destiny. It was meant to be. They're the one for me. I think many of us have been there. And sometimes we even get what we thought we wanted so badly, despite all of the bad vibes, all of the warnings. And how does that tend to work out? And arguably, the Dark Tower has some bad juju surrounding it. So we'll just have to wait and see, because that is not dissuading Roland at this point in the story. And perhaps he gets what he wants, and we'll see how that works out. If that happens, we just have no idea at this point. We don't know. But this is, you want to know now, don't you? Mm-hmm. Back to the action, and we're going to talk about the second time that Roland leaves Eddie. And this is so that he can feed himself and take some aspirin, which for some reason he can't pronounce. So he's calling it Aston. He's trying to say aspirin, but he can't. And this is where we get the delightful passage about Roland drinking the Pepsi and how he can't fathom how anyone in this world would be using a drug like cocaine when there was so much sugar widely, readily available. So that's fantastic. The food, the soda, but mostly the Aston starts to make Roland feel better. And more internal struggle from Roland is shown to us to let us analyze him, as we love to do here. King writes, Roland put his head back, closed his eyes, and thanked God. God and Eddie Dean. Don't make the mistake of putting your heart near his hand, Roland. A voice from the deeper ranges of his mind spoke. This was not the nervous, tittery, bitchy voice of the man in black, or the rough one of court. To the gunslinger, it sounded like his father. You know that what he's done for you, he's done out of his own personal need. Just as you know that those men, inquisitors though they may be, are partly or completely right about him. He is a weak vessel, and the reason they took him was neither false nor base. There is steel in him, I dispute it not, but there is weakness as well. He is like Hax, the cook. Hax poisoned reluctantly, but reluctance has never stilled the screams of the dying as their intestines rupture. And there is yet another reason to beware. But Roland needed no voice to tell him what that other reason was. He had seen that in Jake's eyes when the boy finally began to understand his purpose. Don't make the mistake of putting your heart near his hand. Good advice. You did yourself ill to feel well of those to whom ill must eventually be done. Remember your duty, Roland. I've never forgotten it, he husked, as the stars shone pitilessly down, and the waves grated on the shore, and the lobster monstrosities cried their idiot questions. I'm damned for my duty, and why should the damned turn aside? There's a ton in there we gotta wrangle with here. So number one, I feel like this is kind of like a psychological projection. So a lot of times when we are really mad at somebody else for something that they're doing, it's really us looking at parts of ourselves that we don't like, that we're seeing kind of reflected back to us. And I feel like it's a kind of a fit here. So let's look at it through that lens. So the voice of his father saying, you know that what he's done for you, he has done out of his own personal need. That's exactly what Roland is doing here. There is steel in him, but there is weakness as well. Also, Roland, he is like Hax, the cook. Hax poisoned reluctantly, but reluctance has never stilled the screams of the dying. If you remember, we actually compared Roland to Hax in the last book in this same kind of way, saying Roland is being such a hypocrite, thinking about Hax, telling the story of Hax and what a bad guy he was, killing off little kids, innocent children. And we're like, oh, you're doing the same thing, Roland. You're doing the same thing. So this comparison, I feel like is what we kind of did last time. Here it is again, where Roland's saying Eddie is like Hax the cook. He poisoned reluctantly, but reluctance has never still, So this is, no, like you, that's you. You're weak. You let the kid die. That's you, Roland. So think about that for a minute. He was reluctant about killing Jake, for sure. But reluctance did not stop Jake from plummeting to his death. Next up, this line, don't make the mistake of putting your heart near his hand. Too late, because this comes directly after Eddie's declaration of love for Roland. So too late. He already loves you. And Mr. Badass Roland, you might also already love him. He's already thought how Eddie achingly reminds him of his old friend Cuthbert, his old dear friend Cuthbert. And Eddie is Roland's destiny. I don't know about the tower. We're not sure about that, but Eddie for sure is the one for Roland. We saw the oracle prophesizing about Eddie. We saw the man in black draw the tarot card with Eddie's actual face on it. This is a fated relationship. It is meant to be. And is there any fated relationship like this where one is just supposed to be merely a pawn for the other one and disposed of? I mean, I guess. I don't know. But it makes us, at least in the context of this book, say, I don't think so. It doesn't feel like that. Roland is also going to be giving his trust over to Eddie. Don't put your heart in his hand. He's giving his trust to Eddie in the next chapter by letting Eddie run the show. And then concretely, a physical manifestation of this, if you will, is giving his gun to Eddie. So the idea of putting his heart near Eddie's hand, he's taking this gun, which is this very sacred, meaningful, intensely powerful object full of feeling for Roland. Could you say that his guns were his heart? Maybe. And putting that into Eddie's hand. What do you think? Next up in our analysis of all of this, good advice. You did yourself ill to feel well of those to whom ill must eventually be done. It's bad advice, yo. Why do you think that everyone that you like or love needs to be sacrificed in the name of the tower? Why do you think that, Roland? Who told you this? Stop it. But Roland is acting like he has a choice here. And I think the bigger question about love is, can you choose who you love? Is it a choice? And when something is so fated and destined as this drawing is, does Roland even have a choice here? And he revealed in The Gunslinger, Roland did to us, that he loved Jake from the first moment that he met him. He was reluctant about that, but he shared that. He was opening his heart. We did learn that about Roland. He loved Jake from the moment he met him, as he had Susan Delgado, remember that? So Roland falling immediately in love with people is a thing. And that's why I'm kind of saying, I think that's already happened here with Eddie, and he's just pretending. No, he has a choice. This is a bad idea. He's not allowed to do this. But it's already done. This is finished. And Eddie saves his life multiple times. He's cooperating with him to start. He's bringing him food, medicine. And Roland is putting him on the same level as God, which I think he is. Thank God. And Eddie Dean. That's love. So he's not saying it in any of direct words, how I think I love him, but I think every single thing that we've talked about here, yes, you do. Yes, you do love him already, Roland. We know that, even if you can't admit that to yourself. So one more thing on the topic of loving someone is this idea of intimacy that I talked about in the beginning of the show, where when you really, really love someone or even lust after them, you have a desire to be one with them, as close as you can get. And Roland and Eddie have achieved that union in a way that probably makes us a little envious. Isn't that what you really want? Is to become one. They've done that. So as close as a relationship could be, I think we're seeing here. So Roland, stop acting like you can just disregard these feelings. You can't. You can choose poorly. You can choose to hurt others. You can choose these sacrifices. But these are the things that turn people into monsters. And he knows that, and we know that. The last thing I want to pull out is the voice of his father. But remember, this is Roland talking to himself, putting on that authority voice to talk to himself here. He needs that authority to talk him out of this love. This man, the head gunslinger that was responsible for pulling Roland away from the love of his mother, from going through the whole training and just distancing these boys, turning into men, distancing themselves from feeling emotion, love, connection to the feminine women in their lives, except to you get to go have sex with one of those women once you become a gunslinger. His dad passed that down to him. So it's not a surprise that the voice of his father is the one who's saying, remember your duty. But Roland talking to himself. So now we see that word duty, and that has some weight to it. Roland doesn't know why he's going there or what he has to do there. But all of a sudden, it's his duty, and yet it's his duty. I'm dying for the story because it sounds like perhaps someone gaslighted the shit out of Roland into telling him, convincing him that this vague, dark, kind of scary, weird thing that nobody's really understanding, that's your duty, you have to, and you get rid of anybody that stands in the way of it, so that Roland's internalized that. Even to the extent that he knows it's bad. He says, I'm damned for this. So what the fuck? Why should I turn aside if I'm damned for it anyway? It's very sad, actually. Does he even really want to do this? These questions are coming up. It's felt like he wants to go to the tower because he thinks he's going to do something great there. But again, that could be some gaslighting that somebody told him. Wonderful things will happen at the tower. What are they? It's going to be good, though. And you have to do it anyway. And he does feel like he has to perform this fundamental act of restoration. It all of this, there's no answers here. It all leaves us profoundly curious and confused about what in the hell is happening. We're wary of Roland's thought process, though. We should be. We should be at this point. Remember, this isn't King telling us about what's going on. This is Roland thinking about it. And I don't think he's a trustworthy narrator. In other words, based on all that we've learned about Roland through our deep psychoanalysis, I don't think we should be taking his thoughts at face value. I think we should be very critically looking at the way he's thinking about these things, the words he's using, the feelings he's having, and being skeptical that that's really what's up. Only time will tell. Directly after this immense passage about soul searching and duty and destiny, Roland eats a hot dog. And once he's done with his dogs, which are nowhere near as good as the Tudor fish he had in our last show, he goes back into Eddie's mind, where they catch a cab and quickly figure out that they're being tailed by several vehicles. They get to Eddie's apartment, where a pizza truck that had been tailing them from the airport shows up, and two of Balazar's henchmen are there to do what? We're not sure. There's an interesting tidbit here as Roland and Eddie see the pizza truck drive up and are awaiting their fate. King writes, Eddie stood ready as the pizza truck pulled up. Roland stood even more ready inside of him. Just another version of Diana's dream, Roland thought. What was in the box? The golden bowl or the biter snake? And just as she turns the key and puts her hands upon the lid, she hears her mother calling, "Wake up, Diana, it's time to milk." Okay, Eddie thought, which is it gonna be, the lady or the tiger? The Lady or the Tiger is a short story written by Frank Stockton all the way back in 1882, and it's shorthand now for a problem that's unsolvable. And the story is fun in that it's about a king who's in charge of everything, and his daughter is the princess, and she starts taking up a relationship with a man that is much below her stature, and he gets in trouble. He's not allowed to get it on with the princess, so he gets put into jail. And the way that fate or destiny is decided here is by choice, circumstantial choice, so that behind door number one, if this man chooses door number one, it's a woman that he has to marry immediately. Behind door number two is a hungry lion that will devour him as soon as he opens the door. And the princess knows who the lady behind door number one is. And she doesn't like her. She hates her. She's this other beautiful woman, and the princess is jealous. And so she's kind of thinking, either one, I can't have him. He's going to choose this bitch and marry her, or he's going to get eaten by the tiger. Not a lion. Did I say a lion? It would have been called the Lady or the Lion, which has a nice alliteration to it, but tiger is a fiercer word, or he's going to get eaten by the tiger. And so the ending of the story is the man is in the day of judgment, and he's going to pick the door, and he looks at the princess, and she's like, she kind of eyes to him which one he should choose. And then we don't get any resolution to what happened there. What did she decide was going to happen to him? And it's this unresolved feeling of tension. But for the man, the lady behind door number one would have been a great prize, rather than being eaten alive by the tiger. We just insert that jealous maiden in there to make it interesting. So that's what Eddie's thinking about, which tells us that he's well read. We didn't really know that about him. And Roland, meanwhile, has this Diana's dream, fairly long story compared to what's it going to be, lady or tiger? And Roland goes into this mythological story that isn't part of the mythology in our world. If you look up Diana's dream, you will not find anything unrelated to the Dark Tower. It's something that Stephen King just made up for this book, which is fantastic. It did remind me, though, I don't know why, but when I thought about Diana's dream and I was kind of trying to figure out where did that come from, just in our theme of cards, in the drawing of the three and the tarot deck and the Tower of Cards and the drawing and all of this, it did remind me of this tarot card, the Seven of Cups, and you can see there's somebody standing there who is going to make a choice. And there is a snake, a dragon. There's some scary stuff there. And then there's jewels, the golden bowl, or the biter snake. So could this be related? Who knows? It's fun to think about, though, isn't it? Back to the story. We get a really great Old West trope here, where we have the two men, sworn enemies, facing each other in the middle of the dusty street. It's high noon, each waiting for the other one to make the first move. And there's dead silence, growing tension, and then a tumbleweed rolls down the dusty street. This is modernized by King, who writes, silence. Cole looked at Eddie, smiling, waiting for Eddie to start the junky shuffle again, scratching, shifting from foot to foot like a kid who needs to go to the bathroom, waiting mostly for Eddie to ask, what was up? And by the way, did they just happen to have any stuff on them? Eddie only looked back at him, not scratching now, not moving at all. A faint breeze blew a ring-ding wrapper across the parking lot. The scratchy sound of its skittering passage and the wheezy thump of the pizza truck's loose valves were the only sounds. Stephen King is having such a good time writing this story. It's craftily done. Did you get the Old West trope there? It's not in your face blatant. It's just there. Stephen King's laughing as he writes it, thinking, who's going to notice the ring-ding wrapper as a stand-in for the tumbleweed here? It's so wonderful. Eddie's doing pretty well in this showdown, even when he finds out that they've been in his apartment, cleared the drugs out. But once he learns they've taken Henry, he loses it. And we see that while heroin is definitely a big weakness of Eddie's, Henry is probably the bigger weakness. Jack Andolini, one of the goons, tells Eddie that they took Henry in order to keep him safe. And Eddie says, Henry's fine. But he knows better. He knows that Henry is not fine. And we hear these details about how Henry is smoking cigarettes, falling asleep, burning holes in his shirt, somehow cutting his hand on the electric can opener, leaving his drug paraphernalia all over the place. He's a mess. And King writes, Henry, he would say, Henry, you got to take care of this. This is getting out of hand. You're a bus walking around waiting to happen. Yeah, okay, little brother, Henry would respond. Zero perspiration. I got it all under control. But sometimes, looking at Henry's ashy face and burned out eyes, Eddie knew Henry was never going to have anything under control again. What he wanted to say to Henry and couldn't had nothing to do with Henry's getting busted or getting them both busted. What he wanted to say was, Henry, it's like you're looking for a room to die in. That's how it looks to me. And I want you to fucking quit it. Because if you die, what did I live for? That's big. So we learn just how deep this connection is on Eddie's end, how codependent, so deep that he's living only because someone else is depending upon him. Without someone to look after, to take care of, Eddie doesn't feel that he has any purpose. If we've been paying attention, we know that this is not a big surprise because we've been hearing Henry, Henry, Henry. When we meet Eddie, it's Henry who's in his mind talking to him. We hear these little details about when he gets the hot dogs. Henry calls these Godzilla dogs, and Henry calls Jack Andolini old double ugly. So we knew, but we're just finding out more and more just how deeply entrenched Henry is in Eddie's life and in his consciousness. We'll be watching for how this character trait translates into Eddie's relationship with Roland, especially once his brother dies in the next chapter. We notice this unhealthy attachment, and Roland definitely notices too. He's come down pretty hard. He has to come down pretty hard in order to get Eddie to calm down. Eddie really just loses it when he hears that they have Henry. And Roland's like, dude, take a chill pill. It's okay. And it takes a minute, but Eddie does calm down, and he tells Roland that he'll be cool. And so Eddie is hauled away to Balazar's in the pizza truck with Roland along. And next we're going to meet Balazar, whose bar is, of course, the Leaning Tower. That's why the chapter is called The Tower. And who is also, of course, building a tower of cards as we're introduced to him. We learn that he's a serious baddie. He is not somebody that you want to mess with. We learn that he believes that Eddie is running for the feds, and he plans to kill both Eddie and Henry. He would like to get his drugs, and he wants his curiosity satisfied. He can't understand what has happened here. And he's such a smart man that it's killing him. Curiosity killed the cat, and it does in this case. We see that Henry is cooped up in a storage room. They're shooting him up with heroin. He's really out of it, and they're playing Trivial Pursuit to pass the time. And to the amusement of his captors and to us, the reader, every single question that he is asked, his answer, after pause, long consideration, is Johnny Cash. How many years old were you when you realized that Johnny Cash's nickname is the Man in Black? And that is, of course, a main character in this story. Stephen King hands it to us when one of the men makes up a question that's not actually on the card, referring to his nickname is the Man in Black, because they want him to answer Johnny Cash to get the question right. That was Stephen King being like, hey, if you didn't get the joke, here it is. I didn't even realize that at least first time I read this book. So just curious if anybody out there caught that. You're very smart if you did. And if you didn't, don't worry. It escapes the best of us. It escapes the best of us sometimes. Eddie and Roland pull up to the Leaning Tower in the van. And in a scene that very closely mirrors Eddie losing his shit over Henry's gone, Roland completely loses it when he sees the Leaning Tower sign. He doesn't know that that's what it is. He just sees the red neon against the dark night, and he's like, the tower! And he comes forward in Eddie's consciousness and just freaks out. And Eddie now is the one who has to be like, hey, wait, calm down. No, it's not. It's just a sign. It's just a sign. So very similar mirroring there, even down to Roland being the one that says, I'll be cool at the end of that transaction. So we're going to move into chapter 5, Showdown and Shootout. This one's going to move a little faster. I know that took a long time to get through 4, but this is a lot of action. There's not too much to say about the magic, mystery, and metaphysics of this. But I do want to talk about Balazar, the name Balazar, before we get started, because that's an interesting name. And even though we're not with Balazar for very long, I wanted to see what is there. And Balazar isn't even a name. It's a derivative of a name, but Balazar is a parish in Portugal. There's a famous saint from that place, so people might know that name of that little town because there's a famous saint from there. Otherwise, we're talking about the name Balthazar. And that has variations to it as well. So Balthazar is his Babylonian name, and it means Bel, protect the king, and Bel was this Babylonian god called Marduk. I don't know how much that is related, but here's something I'm digging, and this feels related to me, where Belshazzar is another variation of this name, and it was the name of a Babylonian king, the last Babylonian king. In fact, the son of Nebuchadnezzar, or grandson maybe. There's some historical dispute about that. I found out way more than these people than I really was trying to, but let's call him son for the sake of reflecting the Bible story. And Nebuchadnezzar, this king of Babylon, had gone into Judah and captured the city and destroyed the temple and took all of the nice things, the silver, the gold, the jewels. So Nebuchadnezzar is this thief and passes this down to his son Belshazzar, who is going to throw a big party, and he's going to use all of the gold and silver. So these are thieves. These are not good guys. They're gangsters, if you will. So Belshazzar is having this party, but it's not going as planned, because the hand of God shows up and starts writing something on the wall. And Belshazzar is really scared and starting to get very freaked out and nervous about his situation. And he's like, what does this mean? And he's trying to figure it out. So do you see, this is a gangster who's super rich and just living it up in the palace. And then something weird happens. And Belshazzar is like, we got to figure this out. Nobody knows what it means. He goes to Daniel. This is all found in the book of Daniel. And Daniel is this man who was very smart, studied, perhaps a magician, that they took from Jerusalem. So they took the good, I don't want to say good, but they took the smart people from Jerusalem and basically made them their slaves. And they're like, get Daniel in here. He'll tell us what this means. And Daniel, if you don't know, is the guy that was Daniel in the lion's den. So even if you're not a big biblical scholar, the story of Daniel in the lion's den is kind of in popular culture. And there's paintings. There's at least one or two very famous paintings of Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel was a gunslinger. Daniel was somebody that had deep steel in him, that said, I'm going to do the right thing here, and I know who I am, and I'm going to keep my focus, and these wild animals are not going to get the best of me. Gunslingers are not victims of circumstance, and Daniel was not that. So this gunslinger comes in and reads the writing on the wall, which says, you're a bad dude, and you're done. Your days are numbered. You're going to die. And that very night, the King Belshazzar is killed, and his kingdom is destroyed. So there's some similarities there, wouldn't you say? I don't know how much of a stretch it is, but we do know that Stephen King pulls from a lot of the Bible in The Gunslinger. We haven't seen much of that in this book. And this Belshazzar and Balazar are not the same name. But does Stephen King know that story from the book of Daniel? Yeah, I'm going to ask him someday. Okay, so Balazar. They walk into Balazar's tower, and Roland hands over his trust to Eddie. Eddie's like, I'm going to take care of this. Let me do the talking. Conversation is crazy because Eddie's like, they already delivered the drugs here. They're here. I'm going to go get them. Just let me go into the bathroom and I'll come out with your drugs. And then you let me and Henry, let us go. And Balazar's like, what is happening? Because he looks at Eddie and he's like, he's not lying to me, but how can this be so? And the tension is growing as he's trying to figure this out. You can't figure out magic. That's what gets him in the end. And finally he says, okay, yeah, go into the bathroom, but you're bringing Jack with you. And Eddie freaks out, but Roland's like, no, let him come. We got this. They strip Eddie, he's naked now, and check every nook and cranny for the drugs, which are not there. Go into the bathroom, and meanwhile, Henry dies. And we were told this at the beginning of the chapter. So the chapter opened with that famous king thing. He's going to die. And that works well for this magnificent dramatic irony where we know that he's going to die. We're just waiting for when it's going to happen and what the response is going to be. So when Henry does die, we're not surprised. We knew it was coming. But how bad is this going to be? What is this actually going to look like? So all of this is happening at the same time. Eddie and Roland and Jack Andolini in the bathroom. They yank Andolini through the magical door. Now they're on the beach. And Roland is going to... Jack has a gun, but Roland has a gun as well. And Roland is about to shoot Andolini. And then there's a dry click. And now this idea of those wet shells, all the way back in the beginning of the story, in the prologue, we set up that idea of wet shells, perhaps going to fire, perhaps not, starts to pay off. So he doesn't shoot Andolini. So Andolini is now going to shoot him. But Eddie saves his life by hitting Andolini with a rock. And then Andolini's like, I'm just going to kill Eddie because this crazy junkie is the whole reason that all of this weird shit is happening. But Roland is going to fire again, hoping that it's not a misfire this time, and it's not. And then we get this Wild West scenario that Roland's only seen twice in his existence, but feels pretty crazy, where when he fires the gun, it hits Andolini's gun at the exact moment that he pulls the trigger, exploding the entire gun, exploding that round, and then the whole gun explodes. So it blows off Andolini's hand and his face, and he can't see, and he's screaming, and he's very quickly dinner for the Lobstrosities. So we've lost Andolini. Meanwhile, in Balazar's office, he can hear this going on, but he doesn't, it sounds far away because it's through the magical door and then through the actual physical bathroom door. So he thinks it's firecrackers down the street. It's just, all of this chapter is action-packed, tension-building, start to finish. It's wonderful. It's so good. Now, Andolini's dead. This is where Roland hands over his gun to Eddie, a big moment, and he's like, there's going to be a lot of shooting. They go back into the bathroom at the moment that, I forget his name, is telling Balazar, Henry's dead. Eddie hears that, loses his shit again, but it's helpful because when Eddie gets that gun, we're going to hear about, I want to review this, what happens when he hands over the gun. Because we've seen glimpses of this gunslinger's heart in Eddie, this deep steel, and it starts to show itself more clearly in this scene. So King writes, the sandalwood grips of the revolver were so smooth that Eddie's first act upon receiving it was to nearly drop it on his toes. The thing was so big, it looked prehistoric. So heavy, he knew he would have to lift it two-handed. The recoil, he thought, is apt to drive me right through the nearest wall. That's if it fires at all. Yet, there was some part of him that wanted to hold it, that responded to its perfectly expressed purpose, that sensed its dim and bloody history and wanted to be a part of it. No one but the best ever held this baby in his hand, Eddie thought. Until now, at least. But when Eddie hears that his brother has been killed, murdered, that knowledge fuels his gunslinger soul. And Roland sees that and he's like, do you want to do something about this? Eddie's like, yes. And we see that kind of calm coldness coming over him that's familiar to us through the story of Roland in Tull. And it's not hard to lift at all once he has that gunslinger fever running through his veins. Balazar's done. He's done trying to figure this out. He knows that this is really bad, and he's like, okay, everybody, like, just... And now Henry's dead. It's coming to a pinnacle, and he's like, we're just gonna kill Eddie. We're done messing around here. So he calls in the goons. Eddie and Roland they're about to step out of the bathroom, but before they do, Eddie grabs the Keflex, which is conveniently on display in the magic cabinet in the bathroom. But this is what Roland needs, and Eddie knows that he needs it. So he gets that and stores it in the sink, and he's like, we got to bring this back with us. The two worlds now are colliding when the gunfight starts. It's great. Not too much to say about it. You read it. You know it's fantastic. I don't like action sequences in movies. I don't like to watch the shootout in the movie, the chase scene. That doesn't really interest me. But when King writes it, I'm very interested. He knows how to make it hold my attention. There's several heart-stopping moments. Again, as the misfires continue at key moments. Eddie is saving Roland's life. Roland is saving Eddie's life. Eddie hits Balazar in the shoulder, but it's Roland that takes him out for good. They kill almost everyone in the building. They're each doing their part. A few pieces I do want to pull out. There's a scene where Roland is out of shots. I think he had one or two, but it's mostly misfires. And Eddie knows that he's out of shots. And Roland, though, has picked up one of the dead guy's guns. So he actually has a gun, but Eddie doesn't know this. And Roland's getting ready to fight again. King writes, Roland crawled to the corner of the desk. Eddie rose, aiming toward the door and the charging men. He knows Balazar's there waiting, but he thinks he's the only one of us with a gun now, Roland thought. Here is another one, ready to die for you, Roland. What great wrong did you ever do that you should inspire such terrible loyalty in so many? So, just to highlight, Roland is still having this internal battle with himself about love. And the story for him continues to be about how he is willing to sacrifice others, but not willing to sacrifice his own quest for the tower. The second thing, which is just kind of a cool little magical moment, perhaps, is this feeling that Eddie has during it. And King writes, George got off one shot before Eddie's bullet drove him back into the screaming man, bowling him over like a 9-pin. But it went wild. An irrational but utterly persuasive feeling had come over him. A feeling that Roland's gun held some magical, talismanic power of protection. As long as he held it, he couldn't be hurt. And a talisman is, of course, something that averts evil, brings good fortune, produces miraculous effects. Stephen King even wrote an entire novel with Peter Straub entitled The Talisman. Is this just a feeling that Eddie has, or is there some truth to it? Is there something as extra physical about this gun? And I would say that based on what we know, that these guns handed down from generation to generation to generation of these kings from the line of King Arthur, Excalibur, the sword of King Arthur, had that talismanic, magical property about it, the sword in the stone. So I don't believe that King just put this in there like some delusion of Eddie's feeling like, oh, this thing is probably magical. No, I think it is. I think it is magical. And Eddie is protected. He's fighting naked. He's never done this before to our knowledge. And he's doing really, really well, even by Roland's judgment. So could the gun actually be part of that protection? I think so. They blow almost everybody away, and then everybody else is running away, except for one last guy called Kevin Blake, who has decapitated Henry Dean, and he's going to throw the head of Henry at Eddie and then kill him. So just making his life miserable before he ends it. And it works. Eddie just loses his mind when he sees what has happened, and he starts running at Kevin, just click, click, click. There's nothing left in his gun. But luckily, Roland has seen all of this. He manages to easily take out Kevin. Eddie's standing over his dead brother's gory head. He's screaming. He's standing over Kevin, and he's click, 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 just like screaming and firing into this dead man. And Roland's like, hey, hey. And Eddie hits Roland in the face with his own gun. So hard that Roland loses consciousness for a few minutes. That's huge, because who gets the best of Roland? Now, Roland is pretty sick, so I'm going to chalk it up to that, kind of. Like, he's not his best here, but he is a gunslinger, even if he's on death's door. But Eddie is too. Eddie gets the better of him here. So just noticing again, Eddie is a gunslinger, 100%. Magical guns or no. Roland comes to a few minutes later. Eddie's cradling the dead brother's head, and we just get this very clear look at the sad, pathetic codependency relationship that has come to an end now. And Henry wasn't dependent on him at all, really. I mean, he was, but it was Eddie dependent on Henry's dependency. So not just like, I depend on you to help me and you depend on me to help you. I depend on you to need me to help you, is what we're seeing here, is what we're being told about this. So he's a mess. The SWAT team showed up. There's tear gas pouring through, and Roland has to convince Eddie to go with him. They have to go back through the door. King writes, "What's on the other side of that door for me?" Eddie asked the gunslinger quietly. "Go on and tell me. If you can tell me, maybe I'll come. But if you lie, I'll know." "Probably death," the gunslinger said. "But before that happens, I don't think you'll be bored. I want you to join me on a quest. Of course, all will probably end in death. Death for the four of us in a strange place. But if we should win through," his eyes gleamed, "if we win through, Eddie, you'll see something beyond all the beliefs of your dreams." "What thing?" "The Dark Tower." "Where is this tower?" "Far from the beach where you found me." "How far? I know not." "What is it?" "I don't know that either, except that it may be a kind of a bolt, a central linchpin that holds all of existence together. All existence, all time, and all size." "You said 4. Who are the other 2? "I know them not, for they have yet to be drawn. As I was drawn, or as you'd like to draw me." "Yes." Eddie decides to go with him of his own free will. And as they're about to walk through the door, we get to see Eddie's perspective on the whole thing. King writes, And in spite of everything, all his pain and sorrow, he suddenly wanted to see this tower of which Roland spoke. He wanted to see it very much. And with Henry dead, what was there in this world for him? Their parents were dead, and there hadn't been a steady girl since he got heavily into the smack 3 years ago. Just a steady parade of sluts, needlers, and nosers. None of them straight. Fuck that action. They stepped through. Eddie actually leading a little. As they step onto the beach, Eddie realizes he needs a fix, but it's too late. The door is closed on that world forever. Roland takes his Keflex, which again he cannot pronounce. And it's interesting, did you notice that the two words that Roland can't say are both words that don't have an equivalent in his world? Aspirin and Keflex, antibiotics, these things don't exist. Is that why he can't say them? Probably not a coincidence. Anyway, we're going to end the chapter here. Roland takes his chieflet, as he calls it, and his Aston, and lies down to either get better or die, and he takes Eddie into his arms as well as he could, and after some difficult time, both of them slept. That's it. That's it for part 2. Next time, we're going to talk about Shuffle, and we're going to start The Lady of Shadows. The exact chapters are in the notes for this episode, so come back and let's see what's behind door number 2. I'm very excited to figure out who is the Lady of Shadows, and does Roland live or die? Does Eddie kick heroin or not, or does he die? We don't know, but we're going to come back and find out. Thank you so much for joining me. I love talking to you about this. Thank you for liking and sharing. Thank you for subscribing. And if you're interested in talking to me and doing a guest host episode and who knows what, I'm just open to ideas right now. I do have a guest episode coming up soon that I'll tell you about shortly. But reach out to me. You can comment on the video or RealityRemixRadio at gmail.com. You can find me over there. I'd love to hear from you for any reason at all, not just because you would like to work on this show moving forward. Until we meet again, my Dark Tower friends, may you have long days and pleasant nights.